Today's lesson is discipleship failure. What is it and why does Mark do it? One of the themes throughout Mark's gospel is his portrayal of his followers versus his opponents. The gospel begins with a very clear distinction between his followers and his opponents. His followers would be the enthusiastic crowds, the disciples, people he healed, the 12 apostles. His opponents would be those with hardened hearts, the chief priests and the scribes, the political authorities. But what we start to see as the gospel progresses is that line between friend or foe blurs. To the extent that by the end of Mark's gospel, those that you originally thought were the followers were denying, were betraying Jesus. And those who you once considered the foe, like the Roman centurion at the foot of Jesus' cross, was recognizing Jesus as the true Son of Man. This is what I mean by discipleship failure. Remember, discipleship failure includes anybody that was following Jesus. Now the next question was, why does Mark do this? Why does Mark blur the line, other than perhaps historically that's what happened? An obvious reason number one why Mark does this, is that Mark's audience is being persecuted. He wanted his audience to think about that if a Roman soldier was knocking on your door, would you also fail Jesus? A secondary reason why Mark might do discipleship failure is that as a Gentile, Mark's audience constantly heard the Jews were the ones who were going to be saved. The Jews are the children of God. The Jews are God's favorite. They're God's chosen. And the Gentiles were constantly told by the Jews that they didn't have a chance for salvation. So wouldn't this rock Mark's audience's world to hear that the original followers of Jesus, who were, for the most part, Jewish people, failed to live up to the mark, to the characteristics of true discipleship? And on the other hand, the people that were quote-unquote the enemies, namely the Gentiles, the non-Jews, had a chance for salvation. And this is why I think Mark portrays discipleship failure in this way. To appeal to the persecuted audience so that they don't turn on Jesus, so that they don't fail Jesus, and to appeal to the Gentile audience to give them a sense of hope, to show them that they have a chance for salvation. In this video today, I'm only going to show you a couple examples of discipleship failure. My students are doing a project where they have to research numerous examples, so I'm only going to give you a couple that we can work with. Going in order, beginning with Mark chapter 1, Jesus cures a leper. Jesus tells the leper, don't proclaim this to anyone. And what happens? The leper goes off and tells everyone. This is a constant thing in Mark's gospel where Jesus tells people he healed not to proclaim it, and quite the opposite occurs. Why can't they keep their mouth shut? When Jesus heals him, Jesus does talk about Levitical code. He talks about the book of Moses, which makes me think that the leper was Jewish. The next story I want to show you is Mark chapter 6. This is called the Rejection of Jesus at Nazareth. He came to his hometown and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James? And are these not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Jesus is amazed at the unbelief of his hometown. This is Nazareth. These are his neighbors that he grew up with. These are his family and friends. And they are questioning Jesus. They're asking, to what extent does Jesus have authority to do this? How can Jesus minister? Is Jesus a Pharisee? Is Jesus a priest? What gives him the right? Is Jesus a prophet? And Jesus could barely minister while he was there because of all this skepticism. People would snarl at him. People would constantly question him. This is his hometown. you'd expect some hometown pride, right? You expect some home support. Unless you're LeBron James. This next story is found in Mark chapter 7. Now, this isn't discipleship failure, but it's a game changer. And again, to fit my thesis that suggests Mark is trying to convince his audience that they have a chance of hope, they have a chance for salvation, I believe it's this story that best exemplifies that. From there, he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. I love this woman. She is the only person in the entire Bible that gets Jesus to change his mind. This woman is described as being a Gentile. She's a non-Jew, yet she has faith in Jesus. And she begs Jesus to perform this healing. She begs him. Jesus' response, granted it did just say Jesus was trying to avoid the crowds, avoid notice, so maybe he wasn't in the mood to be social. Jesus says to her, "It's not fair for me to give what belongs to the children to the dogs." The term children throughout the Old and the New Testament refers to the children of God. And it wouldn't be appropriate for me to give what belongs to the Jews away to the Gentiles. Dog was a derogatory term of the first century against Gentiles. Jesus is disrespecting this woman. And social customs of the first century would have permitted this woman to slap Jesus across the face for that disrespect. But instead, and again, I love this woman. This woman holds her ground. She doesn't turn her back on Jesus like that rich man did. She looks right at Jesus and she says, "Sir." I love that. You know, it wasn't, "Oh, sir." It was, "Sir. I might be a dog, rough, but guess what? Even dogs get to eat crumbs that fall from the children's plate." And Jesus was like, "Touché. Right on, woman." And Jesus is so impressed with her. He's just like, "Your kid's healed. Go right home. You'll find the kid is fine." It's a little bit of a disturbing image of Jesus that Jesus initially blows off this woman. Matthew adjusted the story by saying he said this to test her faith, which for all we know, maybe that's what Jesus was doing, that Jesus was simply testing this woman's faith. But Mark doesn't say it that way, so I'm a little bit skeptical. And I think Luke was skeptical too, that's why he cut the story out. This woman, a Gentile, had faith in Jesus, and she was willing to stand her ground. And in Matthew's gospel, it says from here on out, Jesus was going to serve the Gentiles as well. Imagine Mark's audience reading this. Mark's audience, Gentiles, going, "Whoa." And this is the beginning of what becomes known as the Catholic Church. It is a universal church, Jews and Gentiles. The next story is found in Mark chapter 11. It's the story of Jesus cursing the fig tree. Jesus goes up to this tree right after the Palm Sunday event and realizes that the tree has produced no fruit, and so he curses the tree. He kills the tree, it withers. Right after that story, Jesus overturns the table in the temple, and then they come back to that story. And the disciples pretty much ask, "What happened to this tree, Jesus?" And Jesus talks about how it hasn't produced any fruit. The fig tree has been, in the Old Testament, a traditional symbol of Israel, symbolic of Judaism. And I believe Mark strategically placed the story of the fig tree right after Jesus enters Jerusalem, the city of God, and mixed in with Jesus overturning the temple, the house of God for the Jews, as a way of saying the Jews aren't producing. The children of God aren't producing fruit. Now that's not me saying, that's not Jesus saying they're cursed. This isn't anti-Semitic. I'm not doing that here. I think this is more Mark trying to teach his audience, that Jesus is unhappy with the way Judaism isn't producing fruit, in the way the temple isn't producing fruit. And Mark is asking his audience, are you producing fruit? The line is blurring. Will the Gentiles produce? At the foot of Jesus' cross in Mark's gospel, only the Roman centurion is there, and he recognizes that Jesus truly is the Son of God. The disciples are not present at the foot of Jesus' cross. Shortly before that, you have Peter denying, you have Judas betraying. I believe the most extraordinary example of discipleship failure is how Mark ends his gospel. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The end. What do you mean, the end? Well, scroll down your page. You have right beneath that verse a heading that says the shorter ending of Mark, where they eventually tell Peter, and then they all live happily ever after. And then underneath that, you have the longer ending of Mark, where Jesus appears to a couple different people. And if you look in your margin in the footnotes, there's yet another ending of Mark. Why are there multiple endings of Mark? Mark initially ended his gospel at that verse I just read. They were told to proclaim the resurrection of Jesus, and the women run out of the tomb and tell no one, for they were afraid. These people were constantly being told, don't proclaim, and yet they proclaimed. And now they're being told to proclaim the greatest news in all of history, and they keep it quiet. You know, you figured if there's one thing they would have done right, it would have been go tell everyone, because that's what they've done for the whole story. And they can't even get that right. Fail. Mark wanted to end his gospel on that note. He wanted to end it with a slap in the face to these disciples, the ultimate expression of discipleship failure. The reason why we have multiple endings to Mark is that verse 8 wouldn't be historical. We wouldn't be talking about Jesus' resurrection today had not the witnesses gone out and said that it happened. So the early church had an issue with Mark's original ending, and so they tacked on this short ending. But if you look at that short ending, it's really silly in comparison to Luke's ending, and Matthew's ending, and John's ending. So as you scroll down your page there in Mark chapter 16, you'll see that all those other passages are paralleled in other Gospels. And that's because sometime within the first couple centuries of Mark's Gospel, people went back and took the stories out of the other Gospels and placed them into Mark, in order to make it more historical. My problem with that is that Mark wasn't trying to tell history. He was trying to tell theology. He was trying to tell a story about faith and what it meant to fail. Mark wanted the last words of his gospel to be that of the people who knew and loved Jesus best, failing. Because he wanted his audience to ask themselves, are you going to fail too?